Let me, before I start with the question, I do want to thank Will. It's an excellent venue for conferencing. I don't know about you, but I had a bit of jet lag, and it was nice because coming all the way from Australia to have kind of two double beds. So when you can't sleep, you got to choose. I'm going to go this way, or I'm going to go this way. You know, they're both the same, and I had 4 pillows. I don't know about you, but I had 4 pillows on each of the beds, 8 pillows. So one head, and so if you can't sleep, you can get into a pillow fight with yourself. A question before I start, 2 questions. The first question is there anyone here in the audience who has never ever watched drama on television? Raise your hand. Okay, I'll take that box. Everyone's a human. Take that box. And is there anyone here who hasn't read the Romantic Manifesto written by Ayn Rand? You don't be shy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's certainly worth reading. And in that she defines Romanticism. And she defines Romanticism as that category of art which recognizes that human beings have volition. And I've even had an experienced objectivist say to me, well, what does that mean? And that's the reason I tried a different definition, which is almost effectively the same thing. If you have someone who is meandering through life and then commits suicide, you could still argue that they are exercising free will. But when you are showcasing human efficaciousness, and which is what Rand really means by Romanticism, you are not only exercising free will, but you are exercising free will for a purpose. It is directed, purposeful action that has got a very good chance of having success. And so I kind of made up this definition, and I prefer that. And there was also a criticism of Rand at the time that she was trying to put all art into 2 boxes, Romanticism and naturalism. Naturalism, which denies that man has volition, in other words, sort of meandering plots. But when you actually read through the Romantic Manifesto, it is clear that it isn't like exactly 2 boxes, although there's consistency. What she means is that there is a spectrum. And I think of it as 2 bookends of the spectrum. Perfect Romanticism is one end, perfect naturalism is at the other end. And a lot of it is in the middle of it. And what's in the middle of it, you don't have to argue so much. It's not like, people remember Nadia Comaneci. She was 14 years old, I think the Munich Olympics. The first time a gymnast ever won a score of 10, 10, 10, 10. And that was like everybody 10, 10, 10, 10. It wasn't like 8.1, 8.2, and the Qatar judge 10.0. It was actually really 10, 10, 10, 10. And that's absolute perfection, and you might have to have a big debate about that. But otherwise, you can say Adam thinks this movie is 6.1, Dale thinks it's 6.5. They don't have to get a big fist fight over it. 6.1, 6.5. It's not 10, 10. So that bookend concept really helps us. And that concept is essentially based on the Aristotelian concept of final causation. Now, what do I mean by final causation? So art, first of all, is a selective recreation of reality, which is the way Ayn Rand defines it, and is the definition we're going to use according to the artist's worldview. It's a bit longer definition that I've compressed. So any artist chooses to show some things that he or she thinks are significant. So automatically the selection is a part of reality rather than a whole of reality. It's not a documentary. And that selection is always influenced by our subconscious. So now we have this Aristotelian concept of final causation, which is different from immediate causation. So if there is a post office here 50 meters down the road, and you walk 50 meters north, you get to the post office, A causes B. Suppose you have something slightly more complicated. I had to get to Crown Plaza, Nashua by 4 p.m. yesterday, and I started in Franklin. So I start backwards from the climax, 4 p.m. Nashua, and then there's a Boston Express that gets here just before 4. I work back to the train I have to catch from Franklin to get to South Station, so on and so forth. It's not too complicated. But that's like a series of events, so that's final causation. You start with the end in sight, you work your way backwards. Suppose, for example, there was a congressman, and he wanted to become the president of the United States of America. He's not good enough to win an election. How does he do it? And not only that, the presidential election has just happened, so there isn't going to be another one for 4 years. So is there a way for him to become a president? One, he has to become a vice president, hope that the president dies in terms, or he whacks him. I mean, not whack like that, he assassinates him. Or he gets him impeached. But how does he become a vice president? Well, what if the vice president was the governor of Pennsylvania just before he became vice president? So there's going to be an election, and this guy, you could set up a fall guy. You could have the unlikely candidate go for the governor's post, and at the last minute, because you put up a recovering alcoholic, you make him an alcoholic again with inducement, seducement, and so now no one but the governor has to go back to fight for his governor position. The guy becomes vice president, gets the president implicated in another scandal, gets him impeached, becomes president. And that's 2 seasons of House of Cards. Frank Underwood does exactly that. And 2 seasons is 13 episodes of 2 seasons, 13 episodes each is 26 episodes of 2 seasons. And that is, well, it's sort of 51 minutes, 1 hour minus the commercial, 51 minutes times 13 times 2. So that is 663 minutes. So that's 11 hours and 3 minutes. So I'm not so bad at doing arithmetic in my head, so I mustn't be a good advocate of reason. But that 11 hours is 5.5 movies, and that's how final causation has been effected. It's a classic study of human efficaciousness. Now you could challenge his ends, and you can most certainly challenge his means. His means are even far worse than his ends. He is given to deceit, to lying, to manipulation, and he is not afraid of killing people. But it is a study of human efficaciousness, and in that sense, House of Cards is very, very romanticist. So this is a concept I just want to get through. Every story has a classic storytelling set. And the classic storytelling set should have these milestones. And you have to ask yourself the question, because Rand herself was against that kind of rigid structure, and this isn't a rigid structure in terms of, Blake Snyder, screenwriting guru, saying the catalyst must happen on page 10. It isn't like that at all. Why do we have so many precise steps? Why do we need to have a backstory, a prologue, and an epilogue? But the crucial aspect of a story is that the story must have meaning. And if the story is to have meaning, you have to show the meaning through the prologue and the epilogue. The prologue is before the story, the epilogue is after the story. If you don't, in the narrative, show before the story and after the story, it is pretty hard to understand what meaning the story had unless you're writing an essay about it. You've got to demonstrate it. It was my high school chemistry teacher used to always say, show me. You know about the theory, show me. Well, I didn't actually know about the theory. I knew that carbon atoms, they're very promiscuous, and hydrogen atoms love to have sex, and then somehow they get together, and these carbon molecules have a baby in a minute. There you go, ladies. Next time it should be a carbon molecule, pregnancy of 1 minute. So I was sort of like shaking, this flask and then this other flask, and then it's supposed to go bubble, 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 green liquid. It didn't happen for me for quite a few times. And he'd say, I'd come back in 10 minutes, show me. But in the movies, you got to show. It's a demonstration only. So let's have a few illustrations. Dead Poets Society. Anyone seen Dead Poets Society? Well, everyone. John Keating comes and goes, and a student dies because he wants to do something else. His father wants him to become a doctor. But before the story, the students are completely different. After the story, they are awakened. The world after the story, the epilogue, is fundamentally different to the prologue. That's why we got to show it in the narration. Aristotle used to say the story is what is between the prologue and the epilogue. But in the narrative, which isn't the same as the story, you got to show both. And the plot is not the same as the narrative or the story, because the plot is, when someone says, what was it about? Then you tell them what the plot is all about. Now, I'll give you an example of that as well, shortly. Flight. Anyone seen Flight 2012? Denzel Washington, Whitaker? Okay. Before the movie, before the story, in the narrative, he's an alcoholic pilot. He's super confident and he can fly a plane. Even when he's drunk and he's high on cocaine, he can do it damn well. Then there's the catalyst, and then at the end, he's in prison, but he says, I've never been more free before, because he's come clean and he's decided to admit his alcoholism not only to the world, but not only to himself, which is very important, but to the world. So before the story, after the story, fundamental change. On the Waterfront, Marlon Brando, Terry Malloy, he's afraid, he just wants to keep his job. In the end, he's walking the plank against the mafia bosses. Before the story, after the story. There's a fundamental change. If you see a movie that isn't romanticist, you won't see the fundamental change between the first scene and the last scene. The world before the story, fundamentally different to the world after the story. Wall Street, Bud Fox, young stockbroker, admires Gordon Gekko, sees the starry lights of Wall Street, wants to become rich. Last scene, he's an FBI informant who helps to bring Gordon Gekko down. Everyone's seen Wall Street, I hope? Yep, everyone's seen Wall Street. So, I could go on and on, because I see that high school chemistry teacher behind me all the time. Show me! I think I've shown enough here. I need to get better than 5 out of 10 this time. No, it's not chemistry. Looking for Comaneci, Nadia Comaneci. So, Birdman, anyone seen Birdman? Oscar winner? So here's a problem in Birdman. The narrative starts too late in the plot. If you were to explain the plot of Birdman, you would say this. He's a superhero actor, he's down and out, and he needs to do something to save his career. And he thinks of putting up a Broadway play, but he's never been recognized as a good actor. But where do they start the narrative? The narrative starts when he's already trying to put up the Broadway play. Whereas ideally the narrative's got to start with a backstory. And then we have a catalyst that takes you forward. And that helps us understand the prologue and the epilogue. Now, the epilogue's even worse in this film. And that's why that film was fundamentally flawed. Because the narrative started too late in the plot. And then in order to explain his background, they kept doing flashbacks and exposition through some kind of Birdman costume and structure. This was much better. Although the catalyst is the investigation, I've got that wrong. He's an alcoholic pilot who must fly with a hangover. He does so, he does very well, inverts the plane to save lives, only 6 people die. There's an investigation. He's clear of the investigation because although his blood alcohol level is very high, there's a technicality because of which that blood sample can't be admitted. But at the very last scene, when he knows he's going to be very clear, no one's going to catch him, and he's done a fantastic job despite being drunk, and that's proven in simulations, he admits that he was drunk, just because he wants to come clean. Prologue and epilogue. So, what is then the very fundamental difference between movies and television? And the problem in television now is there are 2 kinds of television. There's episodic television, and there was Dallas and other kind of, what you call long story arc. But in a classic episodic television, you have 2 or 3 stories going on at the same time. Anyone following The Good Wife here? Okay, 3 people. I think it's season 5, episode 1. The main episode is about this guy on death row that they're trying to save. But in the background, there are 2 more stories going on. One story is about the governor, who is her husband, and he can't get the right chief of staff, and he hires someone, and that story doesn't finish in that episode. There's also the story of Alicia trying to move away from the firm, start her own firm. This is the main protagonist. That story doesn't finish. That's classic episodic TV, where the main story in the foreground finishes in 50 minutes, and at the same time they're trying to run two other stories to goose your attention. Those two stories don't finish because an unfinished narrative is a hook that gets you into the next episode. But that's running in the background. All these police procedurals, SVU, people seen Law and Order SVU, crime, heinous crime, all that sort of thing. CSI Miami, CSI New York, CSI New Hampshire. No, there isn't CSI New Hampshire. But they might be. But they're all the same, that the episode is central, whereas the new form of television, which is home theater, is not constrained by this sort of Tuesday 7:30 slot. So I got to fully entertain you in that 7:30 to 8:30 slot. This is the problem with the movies. You go to the movies and it's 2 hours, 2.5 hours, max 3 hours. In the old days, they used to have an intermission they could extend. The entire story must finish. No loose threads. Rand is to say that's a literary crime, and I agree with her, if you have loose threads at the end of a novel. But she was talking about novels. You have to have a climax, and you have to resolve all the little threads that you put out before the climax. Television deliberately doesn't do that. And that, I agree, it is a crime. I was reading a book on the bus to Nashua, and they didn't have a climax. So I sat in the lobby, I finished the last few pages. Still didn't have a climax. It's a novel, and it's terribly unfair, I mean, 2 double beds and 8 pillows is not a climax. That's not the climax I was looking for. The reason episodic television doesn't finish except for the main narrative is because they hook you into the characters, and they got to keep following the characters. In a situational comedy, you don't have the awakening that you have in a movie, which is classic. You should have, Rain Man, Tom Cruise at the beginning and the end is different. Denzel Washington's different at the beginning and the end in Flight. In a sitcom, in say Seinfeld, George Costanza or Cosmo Kramer are the same because we laugh with them. We got to see the same guy over and over again. Whereas in a movie, you've got to have a fundamental change happen to a character, and you finish because you're going to be there 2 hours, you finish, you go back. In an episodic television, the characters pull you forward, and there's got to be some unfinished drama. I mean, I'm sure some of your parents or you've tried telling bedtime stories to children, and you try this. When you're telling a short story to a child at bedtime, don't finish the story and say, there's a page left, but I'll do it tomorrow. And the response is, no, Daddy, no, Mommy, you just finish. No, Mom, I got to finish it. Because the unfinished story is a hook. And that's what television is capitalizing on, both in episodic television and non-episodic long arc television. They got to pull you forward. They got to leave you something even at the end of the season to pull you into the next one. A movie can't do that because you're gone. You're trapped for 2 hours. Very few people leave a movie theater even when they don't like the movie, but you're gone at the end of it. They don't know if you'll come back, but that might be a different story altogether. So what happens in movie land? We just have a quick comparison of word counts. George Orwell's Animal Farm, Steinbeck, Mice and Men, Ernest Hemingway, Old Man Sea, very, very short, and novellas. Most of J.F.K. Rowling's work is in Harry Potter's is 150, 180,000 words. A lot is 120. Most novels are between 90 to 120,000 words. Philosopher's Stone is one of the shortest. The Great Gatsby, being made into a movie many times, only 47,000 words. Jules Verne's is more classic, 20,000 Leagues is 138,000 words. Now look at War and Peace and the Ayn Rand novels. The novella is a literary classification. The epic isn't, it's my own. But anything about 300,000 words is fundamentally like an epic. And what happens with epics is that they're very hard to translate. Even novels are really hard to translate into films. And there is a reason for that. Most screenplays are 110 pages in screenplay syntax. And that means they are about 27, 28, 29,000 words in length. But a screenplay length doesn't automatically compare to a novel length. The 28,000 words in a screenplay is 50,000 words, give or take, in a novel, because there are only two elements in a screenplay that are dominant: action, dialogue, what you can see, what you can hear. In a novel, a novelist would write action, dialogue. He would write a lot of internal monologue that's happening inside a protagonist. He would write a backstory. He would write a long description of a mountain and some rivers flowing by the mountain, which would be a terse one-liner description in a screenplay. But 50,000 words is not that long. We just saw the list of, the classic novels, 100,000. So if you try to reverse adaptation, it's going to be very hard for you to translate a movie back into a novel. You need more. And this is the struggle of adaptation. Almost every novel, when you try to adapt into a movie, the struggle is, what do I cut? A lot of studio executives at Paramount, etc., are told to read short stories and novellas. Why? Because they can read 2 in 1 day instead of 1 in 2 days when it's a novel. And secondly, they translate quite easily because it's 40, 50,000 words, and it just... how many times you hear people read novels, right? And then they say, the movie wasn't as good as the book. There was a Facebook post, and there was a challenge put out. Has anybody ever seen a movie in which the movie was better than a book? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And how often has that happened? Once only. I have one experience too, which was the Slumdog Millionaire. And how often do people come out of the movie and say, oh, they didn't include everything? Because they can't. I mean, even in a 100,000 word novel, there's just too much story to put it into a 2-hour film. So when you have an epic, 561,000 words of Atlas Shrugged, 311,000 words in The Fountainhead, which Ayn Rand claims not one line is redundant, not one word is redundant, and it's probably right. It's too hard. But now we've got this new medium, which is home theater. Well, we could have 3 seasons, and that's 22 hours. All of a sudden, you have something. The Atlas Shrugged is kind of 10 times the 50,000, 561, 11 times. So that's 1 season, basically. 11 times. So what this new medium has done is basically allowed us to escape the constraints that were set by movie theaters, which was 2 hours, bums on seats. You got to finish a fully integrated, no loose threads story. And episodic TV was constrained by, well, it's a Wednesday 7:30 slot, and in 50 minutes I got to tell 3 things, 2 of which are unfinished, and they roll on. And a lot of the time the subplots didn't integrate properly the plots because they're in a hurry. They're constantly in a hurry. Anyone watching Madam Secretary? Anyone watching that? No one? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. In that, there is a main plot, and the subplot has nothing to do with the main plot. The subplot is about her children, and it's a very domesticated life that just doesn't make sense to tie that in. And people just lose interest. And they're trying to goose people's attention. Yet, if you have a long arc like House of Cards, Homeland, Tyrant, you're not that bothered, because the way people are going to watch it, they're not going to... I mean, Homeland went over Netflix. Netflix has over 30 million subscribers. HBO cable has over 30 million subscribers. So you're no longer constrained by the way you show a screen story. People are going to watch it at their own pace and finish it off quickly anyway. So you don't have to cater to the commercial break. Like, you remember 24? Anyone watch Jack Bauer, 24? Oh, lots of people. Every time there's a commercial, there were these 4 quadrants. And there's just like 4 narratives in parallel. They pull together, and it's a cliffhanger because those things are going to intersect, and they put that in the commercial because they goose you up to try and come back at the right time. Because I can't wait and go to the kitchen, run back. That problem is no longer there when you're watching things over Netflix or DVDs or cable. And it's not a problem. 24 did it very well, but it just puts more pressure on the writers. So the unit of the story then became the season. And in the season, it's very much like a movie. I mean, the other day I walked into the living room and I watched maybe 10 or 15 seconds of whatever was going on the television screen. And sorry, not the other day, this was about 2-3 years ago. My daughter was watching something. And I straight away asked her, "Are you watching a movie?" And she said yes. And I knew she was watching a movie. And the reason is, television used to be always about dialogue. If you want to finish one narrative plus have two unfinished narratives in 50 minutes, there's a lot of exposition dialogue. Look at any police procedural, whether it's CSI Miami or SVU or NCIS. They always talk the story out a lot. One by one, everybody comes in and they say they found the DNA this here, and then they found this residue here, and it's blah, 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 blah. The movies used to be like this, you know, Ennio Morricone's music, The Stranger with No Name, Clint Eastwood, and it's come riding, you know. And it just goes on and on and on for a minute and a half. The minute you see a scene like that, you say, it's a movie, it's not TV, because TV doesn't do that. But now they do. The budgets have gone up. Now not only they do, they make it look so much movie-like. The writing quality is better. Actors like Kevin Spacey, Michael Fox, Robin Wright, Sally Field, back on TV, it's unthinkable. The budgets have changed. Mad Men did $1 million production budget per episode. So that's a good 13 million per season, which is pretty good. House of Cards is 5 million per episode, 65 million per season. So they're starting to cut, like a blockbuster would be 150, 200 million, but a lot of movies are made for 20, 30. Now how long will House of Cards go for? How long can you stretch it for? Let's imagine we are the story writers. What is the main objective? What's our main objective? Keep our jobs. So we want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But because it's a long story arc, I don't think House of Cards can be pushed for more than 6 or 7 seasons. And everybody thinks so except Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey says, I think we'll push this for 14 seasons or something. Well, he's getting $500,000 per episode, so $6.5 million per season. So no, of course he wants as many seasons as possible because he wants to push it. But that's the essence of what I would call an endless story. So the difference between an epic and an endless story is this. In an epic, you're typically adapting from an epic. You know, War and Peace of the Fountainhead or something, and you're saying, okay, I'll make that into a season. The Michael Dobbs' large book, House of Cards, stretch it out, make it into a season. But then you know when you got to end and how you got to end. In an endless story like, you know, I think Mad Men, Desperate Housewives, Homeland, they're organic stories. And by organic story, I mean even the writers don't know when it'll end and how it'll end. All you know is you got commission for the next season, right? And if the ratings hold up, you're going to get commission for another season and another season and another season. Suddenly the bell rings, and then you go, uh-oh, now I got to finish the story. So now you write down, there was this interesting thing on Google where one of the major directors, I think it was Spielberg, he's gone back into TV, he wrote down all the loose threads to the writer board saying, you got one season, wrap them all up. So it isn't the principles of story, what Rand called the literary crimes being committed. No, they're not being committed. Provided in the last season, like in Desperate Housewives, you wrap everything up, you tie everything. The challenge for the writers is great because you suddenly get this bell rings last season. Okay, you got 11 hours of screen time, but you got to wrap everything up then. But that is a classic endless story. Now that cannot achieve the perfection that you can achieve in a movie story, the fully integrated perfection that Rand and Aristotle talked about. But still very romanticist and still extremely, I think, interesting. And it gives you tremendous potential for increasing human efficaciousness, increasing the showing of human efficaciousness. I mean, look at Breaking Bad. If you did that, I actually thought Breaking Bad could be done as a movie. It wouldn't be quite as good because you have to wrap it up in 2 hours. House of Cards, virtually impossible to do it in 2 hours. Mad Men, impossible to do in 2 hours. And Mad Men, the beauty of it is like the Titanic and Downton Abbey, the authenticity that is recreated. Episodic TV will never do that because episodic TV has to move its situations. And Mad Men don't, they just have that one location. The advertising agency that ties everyone to that spot. So if you don't keep moving around, the budget is manageable when you have a period piece. But they can go for 6 or 7 seasons. The episodic, if it succeeds, can go for 16 seasons. SVU is the longest running show that isn't animated. So you exclude your Simpsons and all that. So the answer to the question, are we in a golden age of television? My answer is yes, we are. And the answer to the question, is it romanticist? My answer is at the moment it isn't, because we're seeing all these dark characters, like Alan Ball, he did 6 Feet Under. He said, oh, the beauty of this new form of television, home theater, is we can show all these very dark characters. But you don't have to show dark characters. And therefore the potential for romanticism, of the telling of epics, if you had a budget, you could do 3 seasons of Atlas Shrugged, book 1, season 1. I think the potential is a lot higher. You can have top-notch actors deliver top-notch acting. The dominance is of the writers in home theater and TV compared to movies. And it's the only form that you can tell organic stories. So essentially, I want to summarize for you the key elements that we discussed today. The number one element was story art matters a lot. Number 2 is that this new form, what we're calling television, is fundamentally different to what we knew as episodic television. There is just a massive difference. Number 3, my take on it is very high quality. It is a golden age. It's not romanticist, but it can be, more so than the old form. Those are sort of my key giveaways today. I did a little Tyrant, I don't know who's seen it, but it's got 1 season, and I put the same structure that you can on any classic movie plot or any classic novel should have this. And I can put the same structure on any open-ended organic story. The difference is, look at the bottom, the climax. So this is a story of a pediatrician who was born in the Middle East and he's living in California somewhere. He gets called, and then suddenly he gets embroiled in the Middle East because his father dies, his brother succeeds the throne, and then he wants to sort of fix everything and make it a democracy. But then pretty soon he becomes, let's just fix them. He becomes like them. He starts to go bad. He has a lust for power. That's his internal flaw. Well, what is the climax and what is the epilogue? We don't know. And I don't think the writers know, because season 1 got good ratings. Season 2 has been commissioned. And if we are the writer board, the world is our oyster. We can turn and twist this story into a heroic story. We can turn it into a dark story. We can do whatever we want with it. The last thing I wanted to mention was subplots, which I shall do so just without reference to the slide. Subplots still should be integrated, whether it's episodic TV or not. It's important that they be integrated. There is a difference in the way they have been handled in movies. I can detail that if someone asks me a question about subplots. Just before I jump on to Q&A, a little sidebar. This book I wrote a while ago. I haven't finished the second book, I'm sorry. It's second novel. It's available on Amazon, including shipping. I think it costs $19, $20. I've got copies for $10 for whoever wants to buy it at the conference from me. Now Adam's the only one who can make a plug. So that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sandra from Texas. When I saw the first season of Scandal, I thought, there's no way this can continue. It's just, obviously, they can't. And they have twisted and retwisted and gone into so many avenues that you never would have thought would have been there, that I have changed my mind about how writers do this. So what I would like to know is if you have any insights on how do writers do this? Do they sit around a table and bounce ideas off each other? Do they all go and write something and then read it aloud and figure out something from what's been written? How do they do that?
As far as I know, and I read some books as well on this, there's a gentleman by the name of Alex Epstein, who, not the objectivist, is a television screenwriter. There is typically a writer board. I mean, if you look at most television series, it'll say created by Mark Cherry or something, and then you see written by, there's always 2 or 3 writers. There's never one. And the writer board would be a few that don't get a feature credit, so there's 4 or 5. And those 2 or 3 change because each episodic TV tends to get a template. The long form television, one of the most prolific writers ever is David E. Kelley. There must be something antipodean universe about screenwriters and objectivists. But David E. Kelley wrote Boston Legal, LA Law, and Picket Fences. He wrote Picket Fences on a legal pad in handwriting all the episodes. That is extraordinary talent, and it's unusual. In most cases, people sit around and say, well, let's try this, let's try that. Now we know we've got to get back to this. So there is a team, and I'm sorry that in the Scandal, I haven't seen that they messed it up. It is very, very difficult to get this right because of the complexity that's involved. But in a novel, for instance, is always typically one novelist.
Vinay, a great presentation. My question is, I had understood that the reason there's so much great episodic TV or TV now is that many of the talented writers have left, film, movie business, because now movies are supposed to be blockbusters or not. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And secondly, I'm just wondering, as you talked about, many of this episodic TV is now dark, with these dark characters, end of the world type scenarios or zombies or whatever. My question is that a reflection of our time, or is it the other way around?
Okay, so that's 2 questions. I'll take the second question second in that order. So the first question is, have good writers left film and gone back to television? But to tell you the truth, I was always an admirer of Aaron Sorkin and David E. Kelley. I think before Sorkin did films, he did The West Wing, and he did the Facebook movie, That Social Network. So I think there have been great writers, but they haven't had a great medium. So there is a marriage of great writers and great medium, and I think that's great. I do want to make a small correction. I am not praising episodic TV. I'm actually praising non-episodic TV, where the story arc, the main story arc that is in the foreground, doesn't finish in the episode. It keeps going on for a whole season. Like the show, The 24, Jack Bauer and Kiefer Sutherland show, it finishes after 24 episodes of 1 hour. And there's a loose thread, a small loose thread that drags you into the next season, which is Jack's personal life, because that doesn't finish. Homeland takes it one step further. It doesn't even finish in a season. It just goes on. And that, I think, is the great thing. Episodic TV is like the classic, sitcoms, the Lucille Ball and all those things. We've been having those for years, the Seinfelds. Now we also have the police procedurals, the NCIS, and they finish. The episode pretty much finishes. There is a small loose thread that is in the background. As to it being dark, I do think, it is a reflection of the times. The critics love dark, and so they're getting Breaking Bad and House of Cards and those kind of very dark characters. But so my answer to that is the potential for romanticism is higher. Because we could, if we had the right budget, do the Fountainheads and the Atlas Shrugs and the Les Miserables in a right way over a season. It just hasn't been done.
I'm interested in how the technology shift, well, first to cable, but then to Amazon, Netflix, on demand, being able to watch marathons, has related to this artistic shift to the long form, where I think the main element is, can you come in the middle of a multi-season plot, and will it make sense?
You hit the nail on the
form. You can do it, but it's hard.
You hit the nail on the head. It is exactly that what has caused this. Is if you try to do it in episodic television 15 years ago, if you had tried, it's very hard. On 24 they used to say previously on 24 blah 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 blah, right? you can still do that previously. I mean, but most people are watching 3 or 4 episodes at a stretch. They're watching it on their own time. If you only had like a Wednesday 8:30 slot, it's much better to finish that whole thing, and then somebody misses 3 Wednesdays, it doesn't matter. So the movement to Netflix and the movement to HBO and the movement to DVD, which preceded the cable and the Netflix, is fundamental. That is exactly why we are now able to tell stories that have indefinite length.
So was this connection being predicted in advance or well in advance, or did it come as a surprise?
I don't know if anyone did predict it, but it sort of evolved together because that's the free market. People saw the opportunity and jumped on it.
Thank you.
If I can trust my hearing, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago in passing Breaking Bad. You referred to it. I haven't been able to hear everything perfectly, but I watch very little of this television. But as it happens, I heard so much raving about Breaking Bad. I have to see what it's all about. So I rented the first episode, and I found it left me when this brilliant man who needed to earn some extra money was working at a car wash. I thought it was so completely implausible. There were so many other things that he would have been more likely to do given his brain power and even his predicament than work in a car wash, that I washed my hands of the entire. There were other things about it that bothered me as well. I'm curious to know what your assessment of the Breaking Bad series was.
Okay. Like I said, we all respond to art differently. We're not identical to each other. We, as in the whole, everybody out here, you can 6.1 and 3.2 and that sort of thing. I remember the car wash episode. I watched 2 seasons of Breaking Bad. For those who haven't seen it, he's a high school chemistry teacher. He gets a cancer diagnosis and decides to earn a lot of money by manufacturing meth. And he's terrific at manufacturing that. But before he gets the idea, he's in financial trouble. And they are just trying to show he has to make ends meet. And I agree with you that car wash is a mistake. But despite his brilliance, he's not rich and he's not earning a high income because he's a high school chemistry teacher. So the odd thing for me was, if he's that brilliant, why isn't he at least a university professor rather than a high school chemistry teacher? They could have shown him a little less brilliant and the story would be fine. He just knows how to manufacture meth. Doesn't have to be a great researcher. So I think that's where the disconnect was. For me, okay.
Thank you.
We had some personality problems too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Walt White has. Yeah, he's a very dark sort of guy. Yeah.
Are there any shows you think currently out there that promote our ideals at all?
No, unfortunately, I can't think of one that's. I thought Tyrant was extremely promising until it came to the last 2 episodes. It's only had its first 1 season because he goes into the Middle East and try and not so much install Western democracy, but also free speech and all that sort of thing. But unfortunately, it's based on Assad's life apparently, and he turns, and it's like power corrupts, so that once he gets the lust for power, he starts to become dark. So I think they're going to go that way.
Oh, I just have one comment about Tyrant, then I had a question for you. What I think is interesting about Tyrant is, given what the country is like, I don't know where they could go but down. The whole idea that they could turn into a democracy, I just don't see how that could develop. So in a certain way, it's logical what's happening.
It is, except that I felt that, I don't want to give away spoilers here, but he basically murders someone, and I didn't think his character needed to fall. He might not succeed in installing democracy or free speech. He could still be a very good person and get some good things done if his own character were to stay upright.
But remember the murder that he commits as a boy.
No, there's another one. Sorry, the spoilers. There's another one, not as a boy, there's another one. The one in the hospital as an adult pediatrician.
Yes.
He commits a deliberate murder.
It's really good.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's one of those shows that you watch and it makes your stomach churn, but you have to see what happens.
That's the grip they have on us. That's the medium. That's why it's so good.
Have you seen Blacklist? Because I noticed you didn't bring that up.
I saw 3 episodes of Blacklist. It didn't grip me. And to answer Clara's question, Blacklist was episodic. And I prefer the long arc, the long story. Blacklist has the episode finishing. Now, there is an underlying current, as there always is. There's one in White Collar that keeps going. But the underlying current is in the background, not the foreground. I want the main story in the foreground, that keep the continuing story in the foreground. That's just my personal preference.
Well, I don't know if I completely agree with you about that, but the reason I bring it up is I think it's interesting that the character of Red, in some respects, embodies the man who is not going to follow anybody else's judgment about things. And so in that respect, he appears to be a bad guy, but he might be more like the kind of hero that we're looking for than you'd realize at first.
Yeah, he's very fiercely rebellious and fiercely independent. Yeah, I agree with that.
Thanks.
Hi. You spoke a little bit about how television it'll be like season by season, and then the rating, it's dependent on the ratings. If the ratings are good, they can continue to produce. If not, they have to kind of wrap things up pretty quickly. Doesn't that kind of detract from the art? Doesn't that kind of make it difficult for the writers to, I don't know, project longer term and maybe develop the story in a more complex
It does,
way?
I agree with you. And that is the challenge. I mean, when I say wrap it up quickly, it's always one whole season. And that season, if it's 13 episodes, 51 minutes, 11 hours, so that's 5.5 movies to wrap it up. So it's not that quick. But it is a challenge for the writers, given the number of loose threads they've laid out, to wrap it up and at the end still make it look like one integrated whole. That is the most difficult part for the writer board, because they kept you on the hook, but they cannot commit a literary crime by leaving you with, 2 beds and 8 pillows for a climax. So.
Yeah, to me that kind of like takes away from the authenticity of the art, but perhaps that's just part of the medium that...
As long as they do it right, then it doesn't take away from the authenticity. If they don't leave you high and dry, if the ratings are so bad that they just don't show the next season, then that's bad news, and it's not the writers who are doing that to you then. It's the producers. As long as they make their best attempt, and I think most of them do, to wrap it up, then I think the art is good and authentic.
So I'm thinking about Romanticism and Mad Men as an example. So Rand's conception, as I recall it, of Romanticism is that it depicts stories where choices matter.
Yeah.
Everyone's moral choices are integral. You've shifted that a little to showcasing of efficaciousness, which is sort of the positive side of this. I mean, you could say in Atlas, the main characters, the negative characters ultimately are not efficacious at their goal, but they're certainly an example of choices mattering. And in Mad Men, I think it's a wonderful example where Draper is highly efficacious in aspects of his work, but the long arc of the story is about his failure, success, where choices are mattering throughout. So I would consider that a very good example of Romanticism, even though it's not all or primarily about his efficaciousness.
Yes, I would. It's good you bring up Mad Men, because there's 2 issues in relation to Mad Men. One is the authenticity with which they apparently recreated the 60s. There are English language anachronisms, like we are on the same, you and I are on the same page, which didn't exist in the 60s, and they bring it up, but that's fine. In the overall, authenticity isn't naturalism, it's high art to recreate that authenticity. In terms of the moral conflicts, I think Don Draper does have, I haven't watched all the seasons, just sporadically, I think he does have a lot of moral conflicts.
Okay.
And this is where that concept of bookends and spectrum helps. I find it helps, because if you try to box everything you see into this is romanticist and this is naturalism, you kind of struggle, because there's clearly elements of both. And almost nothing is, like I said, Nadia Comaneci, it's not 10 out of 10, and so it sits in the middle. In terms of the moral choices versus efficaciousness, I meant efficaciousness not necessarily in terms of success. I meant the possibility of success is clearly there. Like in We the Living, Kira doesn't succeed, neither does Andre, nor does Leo in the long run, but the possibility of success remains throughout the novel that keeps us going. And she certainly believes she's going to succeed, otherwise she would stop trying.
Now, Draper certainly has his moral conflicts, but I would say at each and every point, whichever aspect of his morality or not he's pursuing or ignoring, his choices are mattering to a high degree. So I would say it's quite far on the spectrum toward romanticism.
It is, yeah. His choices do matter to the events of the series, as far as I can say. And there are no coincidences. There is no sort of determinism that everything is happening outside of their control. They are in control, and it's their choices that are determining events. And in that sense, it is highly romanticist.
Right. Another comment is that Weiner has said that he had planned what the ending would be like from the beginning, in general terms, and then the specifics came like in season 4. So in this case, he knew it wasn't, and he didn't want it to go beyond where it
Oh,
did.
that's great. Yeah, that's the
I
ideal
won't
thing.
give
Yeah,
away anything.
that's right.
These dark shows don't overtly promote our ideals, but the plot is based on cause and effect. Conceptualization is based on comparison contrast.
Yep.
So to that extent, don't they, in effect, encourage rationality?
I think as compared to a purely meandering naturalist plot, they encourage you to think that your life matters and you can make a difference, if that's what you mean.
No, I mean in method.
The methods are quite evil in some cases.
No. I mean the method of plot being cause and effect.
That's definitely romanticist. That's what I like about it, in the method. There is definitive cause and effect, and it's more than cause and effect. It's final causation, as we spoke about in House of Cards. It's a very long-range planning with a lot of, what if this doesn't happen, I'll go do it this way, contingency planning as well, which is all very much about efficaciousness in long-range planning, and that's good news.
Right, it is good news. And that, in that sense, it does promote some sort of rationality, even if the ideals that it's promoting are not good.
I agree. It promotes confidence in your ability, which is a good thing.
To be bad.
Yeah, well, confidence to do both good and bad things. So then the ethics are not the right color. That's our problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, I just had to share one possible show that people might like that they haven't seen is Da Vinci's Demons, and
Yeah,
it's a Starz show about Leonardo da Vinci, and he's about 35, and it's about all these events that happen in his life. I don't know that it's that accurate about him, but I don't even care because it shows him as being a completely dominated person, extremely creative and heroic. So people might enjoy that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
And I was going to say, going back to, in your opinion, if there are any shows currently that promote our ideals, I think there are some. It's just that they don't promote them in a way that's overtly, very obvious. Like Boardwalk Empire shows, the bad effects of prohibition, and at the same time it shows the pandering of politicians. One of my favorite shots, like in television history, was the season where I think it's a bunch of white supremacists kill an African American guy, and the local political boss, Nucky Thompson, is speaking to an audience of African Americans about how awful it is, this and that. I'm your brother, I'm with you, we got to put an end to this. And the camera zooms in and zooms out, and he's giving the exact opposite speech to the white supremacists about how what happened was good. I mean, showing bad politicians behaving badly, isn't that to our benefit?
Oh, absolutely. I haven't watched the show, so that's why I said I haven't come across. Doesn't mean that there aren't any. It's just there's so much going on, The Sopranos and The Wire and this and that. And it's only so much you can digest and watch. But I would be happy to watch that because I think what is missing is the ethics that objectivists favor, but the method, the high art in terms of authenticity, great writing, great plots, great cause and effect. All of those elements are there, and the constraints have gone in terms of 2 hours episodic TV. So it's a great launching pad, a great ground to just put in something that is, like you said, Boardwalk Empire, highly romanticist, and closer to our ideals.
And I was going to say even Tyrant, which has been on my radar, but I never really heard that much positive buzz. So now I'm definitely going to watch it. But a show that portrays a dictator in a negative light, I would say to some extent that's positive for us. They could be saying, well, this guy's well-intentioned. He wants to rule their lives, but he hopes for the best. But if it portrays him in a negative light, isn't that a plus for us?
Absolutely, it's even better than that. It could be a benevolent dictator potentially.
Oh.
Yeah, but it just depends. If we were the storyboard writers, we could turn the story still into a really good one. I don't know which way the writers will go. I suspect they might go the Shakespearean route and he slowly goes from a pediatrician to a dark dictator worse than his father. I don't know.
Thanks.
So,
Sorry to be back again, but
No,
I thought of
no,
another show that people might enjoy, which is Gotham. Have you seen that?
no.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
that's
seen
like
Gotham?
it's a
Yeah.
prequel to to the development of Batman, and the hero in it is Tom Gordon, who is the police commissioner that works with Batman, if you remember. But he's a he's a person with complete integrity in that show, and so it's enjoyable to see what happens and how he deals with all the corruption and everything.
And he doesn't succeed, I presume. That's why Batman comes in.
Well, they haven't shown
Yeah.
that yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
so-
succeeds
yeah.
to some extent.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's a TV show,
TV
not
show.
okay.
And
Because there was
is
a
it Abrams,
movie
J.J.
prequel.
Abrams, or it's some famous producer is behind this TV
Okay,
show.
it's a, yeah.
Yeah, I forget who.
Because the movie prequel also always had Commissioner Gordon was the pillar of
Bruno
integrity.
Heller. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
The movie prequel also had Commissioner Gordon being the pillar of integrity,
Mm-hmm.
but you know there is a stage which is reached where he can't manage it, and that's why Batman comes into being. You know.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I believe in Harvey Dent.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the topic of Batman, I know this is about TV, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Christopher Nolan, your conception of him, maybe perhaps specifically the Dark Knight trilogy.
Okay. I love The Dark Knight. I thought it was tremendous and highly romanticist. The moral conflicts on that ship scene were fantastic. As a director, he is extremely, he likes to jag his action a bit too fast. And so I loved The Dark Knight because Heath Ledger had a phenomenal performance as well. I didn't like The Dark Knight Rises just as much, and I definitely didn't like the, well, I wouldn't say didn't like, but not of the same order, the Inception movie that Nolan did. And I think the difference, I'm attributing it to the fact that in The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan was the director, but not the writer. And in the subsequent Inception, he was the writer as well. He was a writer-director. And that might be a gripe of the writers with whom I have an affinity. But the writers think directors should stay directors, because when directors start believing they can write as well, we get a problem. But that's a biased view. So I think Nolan's a great director, but not such a great writer. But I may be wrong. Just based on that evidence of 2-3 movies. Okay. Thanks a lot. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you.